My name is Darrell Jackson, and I serve as the Director of Faith and Work and Faith and Finances at Stitch Ministries there in the Houston region. I also serve as the Pastor of Ministry Operations at the Crossover Bible Fellowship Church in Houston, Texas. I'm so excited to be able to talk about this subject today as relates to the idea of leading on empty from the book Leading on Empty from Wayne Darrell. A lot of the chapters that I read really resonated with me in a personal way. I've had, as a leader, as a pastor over the years, I've had to go through some ebbs and flows, mountains and valleys, just like many other pastors, many other leaders that mount the pulpit every Sunday. But one of the things I think that's really important for me as I began to read the material is to really look at the importance of mental health and taking that seriously. I, like many of you, have been in the pastorate for years. I've actually served in ministry for over 30 years. And during that time, I've served as a lead pastor for about 13 of those years. I've served as a assistant pastor for 14 of those years. And as a worship leader, I'm a producer, music producer, gospel music producer. So I've done a lot in ministry. But one thing that I've discovered is I, like many pastors today, try to do things on their own. And they do it alone, and sometimes it's not really good. A few examples of that was in 2016. I remember during that time, it was a really tough time for me. I was bivocational actually. I was pastoring a church, and things were going well, but they were not going so well. They had some great members, had great ministry going on, but there were some things that I struggled with internally that nobody ever knew about. I call them my silent screams. I was screaming internally, but never really had anybody that could see those silent screams or see the pain that I was going through. And so I did like most pastors do. And I just keep preaching. I kept preaching. I kept teaching. I kept doing the things that I was supposed to do. And so two major events happened in 2016 that just kind of rocked my world. One was the death of my grandmother. I mean, I was raised by my grandparents, and as a pastor, I have sat with many families that I've had to counsel and console and give them words of encouragement as it relates to their families and how they're to trust God, right, and do the God thing. But when that instance hit my door, it took me down. As a pastor who teaches Bible study every week and preach sermons and do the things that we do in ministry, to be Superman. When she died, it wasn't a good place for me. But to add insult to injury, I was actually serving at the church as a pastor, and I was also serving at a really prestigious company, and out of nowhere, lost my job. Fortune 500 company, I'm making six figures. So I really didn't, as a pastor bivocational, I didn't have to take a lot of resources from the church. I was able to get my needs met from this particular organization, and bam. So grandmother passes away, working for this dream job, and I lost that income. And for me, it felt, again, as a pastor, losing grandmother, losing this job that I had that was taking care of my wife and I, that I thought that all the wheels were running, all the engine was running well. Then all of a sudden, bam, out of nowhere, all this stuff started to happen. And it took me to a dark place. So much so, for 2 years, I wasn't talking to too many people. I would do just enough to get by. I stayed in my room most of the day. Matter of fact, all day. I stayed at home. I wouldn't come out. My wife would go to work and do what she would do. But it was a tough place. It was a tough place trying to balance the two. And what I discovered personally is that I needed others. I needed to understand the importance of using other people. And so with that said, to balance the ministry load, I began to assign ministry duties to other preachers that were at the church to help me out. And I would still kind of be in the shadows, but I was getting better. So for 2 years, I went through that. I remember God just sending me this visual of that I'll never forget, and it really helped me to move forward. I was driving shortly after those two events, and I saw a tow truck towing an ambulance. Again, before all this stuff happened, I probably wouldn't have thought too much of it. But this particular day was different because of everything that was going on in my mind, in my family. My little pride, was hurt, and all those things. When I saw this tow truck towing this ambulance, it was like God said to me personally, just like that ambulance needed help to be towed, you also need the same thing. You're a pastor, you're a leader, you're a well sought after speaker and all these things. You need some help. And so I began to become more intentional about getting the help that I need. I had counselor friends that would sit down and talk to me, where I could really begin to open up and share that episode in my life to get healing, to be able to move forward. And I know sometimes in churches and circles, when people talk about going to see counselors and getting help, especially from a pastoral perspective, many guys shy away from that. I was one. I didn't want to go talk to a counselor because in my background, I've heard that you're crazy, something's going wrong, mentally when you go see counselors. But when God showed me that image, it was like, no, I have to go and do this. And so I did, and began to connect myself to some other accountability partners that began to help me move along the journey. Here recently, my wife was diagnosed with breast cancer. Here we go, Superman again. The one who's always providing the encouragement to other families, the one who's always in the pulpit proclaiming truth. Now, that cancer, that C word hit my home. It was, again, at a time where I wasn't prepared for it. I was running around the country, preaching and teaching and doing the things that I do. But then here we go. Wife has cancer. How do you deal with that as Superman, right? How do you deal with this cancer? I was depressed again, dealing with the one I love, who I've been married to for 29 years. And then all of a sudden she comes home saying, "Hey, I got cancer." A few days after that, after my wife told me that, we went to speak to the doctor, the oncologist. Again, I've heard other families having to go through this stuff, but it wasn't like, it was totally different when I went through it, because all of the advice that I had to get, that I gave to other families, I had to now eat those words. I had to now sit there and listen to the cancer talk. But as God would have it, we've been able to get through that season, and we've been able to do better with coping and to find the help that we need, even as a couple. Well, why is this important? I think it's important because, again, as leaders, sometimes we believe that we're invincible, and we forget that as I've said before, the same medicine that we give to our parishioners, that we need to take it as well. So in chapter 7 in the book, Leading on Empty, the new perspective on depression, I found myself there. For years. Again, just doing what I do, going through the motions. But as I began to read chapter 7 on this new perspective, I really began to understand the importance of getting a new perspective, because many times when we're hurt, just like our parishioners, when we hurt or when our parishioners hurt, we're going to go internal, right? We go internal. We shut off the world. We just stop. Everything just stops. But as I began to read, I remember one part of the book, The Stress, when Wayne opens up and talks about his life and how he was he was stressed out and things were going wrong. And he went to the doctor. He thought he was having a heart attack. He thought he had heart issues. And the doctor ran him through several tests. Went through EKG and a stress test, and he was on the treadmill doing that particular test. And I remember as Wayne began to talk about that, thinking about, I went through the same thing at one point in my life when all those things were going on. I thought my heart was coming out of my chest. I didn't know what was going on. But as Wayne discovered that it was nothing wrong with him, right? The doctor sent him home and said, man, there's nothing wrong with you. And the doctor did me the same way. I wanted something to be wrong. I wanted something to be wrong. I went from doctor to doctor. It felt like the woman in the Bible who went with the issue of blood, who just went from doctor to doctor trying to find a cure. But in my instance, it really wasn't anything wrong. And all that to say, as I thought about that particular illustration, that Wayne made an amazing point. He said, for the heart to grow stronger, it must undergo stress. For the heart to grow stronger, it must undergo stress. And as a pastor, as a community leader, as a parishioner, none of us want to go through the testing, the times of testing or the stress, but it's necessary. We read in James chapter 1, actually, as we read in James chapter 1, we discover what James tells people who are scattered. He says, count it all joy when you encounter trials of many kinds, because as we encounter those trials, it's doing something. It's actually therapeutic. God is growing us. Even as a pastor, we are to be growing as well as we're encouraging our parishioners to grow. That we need to understand that we're going to go through tests, that we will be tested on the things that we're preaching. I just think we have to really begin to have that perspective, that focus on Christ. And again, the way that we view our problems oftentimes is the problem. And so I believe that what God is telling us through this particular chapter is that we have to have a clear focus, that even in the midst of what we're going through, our trust and our dependence have to be on God. The things that I do to enjoy life, one, I love to play basketball, right? Can't jump as high as I used to, but I love to play basketball. I love just to see that ball go in the hole. And so doing things like that, I love to go fishing. I love to sit there on the dock, on the pier. But then lastly, I'm a music producer. And so what really rocks my world is to be able to write the songs that I write and to produce the records that I produce. All of those things help me with my mental energy and making sure that it's directed into positive outlets. That gives me peace, that gives me joy, and really helps me to reflect on the goodness and glory of God. We have to begin to trust as leaders. We have to begin to understand the power of the network, and we need to learn how to make the net work. If we're going to get through this, you may be depressed. Again, there's help. We don't have to operate in silos. God is calling us to operate as kingdom representatives. He's calling us to operate in ways of community, and that's how He made us, and that's how we're going to get through this.